If you've ever felt watched while standing alone in the woods, this video is not for you. Tonight, I'm sharing 3 true-style Appalachian horror stories. Stories passed down through generations, whispered by locals who know one simple rule: the mountains hear everything. These aren't monsters you chase. These are the ones that wait, mimic, and follow you home. So turn off the lights, put your headphones on, and listen carefully. And before we begin, subscribe to the channel, because once you hear these stories, you'll understand why people from Appalachia say some warnings are given only once. If you hear your name called from the deep shadows of the tree line after the sun has dipped below the ridges, know you didn't. And if you ever feel the sudden, playful urge to whistle back at the silence, for the love of God, keep your mouth shut. I'm 34 years old, and for nearly a decade, I worked search and rescue out of Asheville, North Carolina. I've spent more nights than I can count under the canopy of the Blue Ridge Mountains, and I thought I knew these woods like the back of my hand. I grew up hearing the old folks talk about the old ways, the superstitions that govern life in the hollows. Don't look up into the trees. If you see something move in the corner of your eye, keep walking. And the big one, never, ever whistle after sunset. I used to think it was just mountain folklore, a way to keep kids from wandering off and getting lost in the brush. I don't think that anymore. The Appalachians are the oldest mountains in the world. They've seen things that humanity hasn't even named yet. When you're deep in those woods, you aren't just in nature. You're in a cathedral of things that were old when the first person stepped foot on this continent. There's a heaviness to the air there, a sense that the trees are leaning in to listen to your heartbeat. It happened 3 years ago, back in late October. My friend Tyler was visiting from Chicago. Tyler was a corporate guy, a skeptic who thought nature was something you saw on a National Geographic special while sipping a latte. He wanted the authentic mountain experience, so I took him out to a remote spot near the Linville Gorge. It's rugged, beautiful, and isolated. We had set up camp on a high ridge. The sun had just vanished, leaving the sky a bruised purple, and the temperature was dropping fast. We were sitting by the fire, the crackle of dry oak the only sound for miles. That's when the silence hit. If you've spent time in the woods, you know the quiet. But this was different. The crickets stopped. The owls, which had been hooting just minutes before, went dead silent. It was as if the forest had collectively held its breath. Tyler didn't notice. He was 3 beers in and feeling bold. He started talking about how peaceful it was, how much he loved the stillness. Then, without thinking, he puckered his lips and let out a long, high-pitched whistle, a sharp, trilling sound that sliced through the mountain air like a blade. My blood turned to ice. I grabbed his arm so hard he winced. "Don't do that," I whispered, my voice trembling in a way I couldn't control. "What?" "It's just a whistle, Caleb. Relax," he laughed. But the laugh died in his throat when the sound came back. It wasn't an echo. An echo fades. An echo loses its sharpness. This was a perfect, crystalline repetition of his whistle, coming from the dense thicket of rhododendrons about 50 yards down the slope. It was too loud, too clear, and it had a strange, metallic vibration to it. We both froze. "Did you hear that?" asked, his bravado evaporating. "Stay still," I told him. I reached for my sidearm, a Glock 19 I always carried on the trail, though I knew deep down that lead might not mean much against whatever was out there. Then the whistle happened again, but this time it wasn't just one, it was a sequence. It mimicked the exact rhythm of the first whistle, then added a second note, a low, mournful slide that sounded like a human trying to imitate a dying bird. It was closer now, maybe 30 yards. "Caleb, someone's out there," Tyler whispered, his eyes wide. I didn't answer. I was watching the tree line. The moon was a sliver, offering barely any light, but I could see the silhouettes of the trees shifting, not because of the wind, there was no wind, but because something was moving between them, something tall, something that didn't move like a person or a bear. It moved with a fluid, jerky grace, like a puppet being handled by someone who didn't quite understand how joints worked. Then came the voice. "Caleb." It sounded like me. It was my voice, but it was wrong. It was flat, devoid of any inflection, as if someone had recorded me speaking and played it back through a broken speaker. Caleb, stay still. Kyler started to hyperventilate. How does it know your name? Caleb, what is that? Run, I said. It was the only word I could muster. To the truck. Now. We didn't pack. We didn't grab the tent. We just bolted. The trailhead was 1.5 miles away, down a winding, rocky path that was treacherous even in broad daylight. We were running in near total darkness, our headlamps cutting frantic arcs of light through the trees. Every few seconds, I'd hear it behind us. The whistling. It was constant now, a frantic, overlapping cacophony of whistles that sounded like a dozen people were surrounding us. And the voices, God, the voices. It started mimicking Tyler's heavy breathing. It mimicked the sound of his boots hitting the dirt. It even mimicked the sound of my jacket snagging on a branch. I glanced back once, just once. My headlamp caught a pair of eyes, or what I thought were eyes. They weren't glowing like an animal's. They were two dull, pale circles set too high off the ground, peering out from behind a massive hemlock. The thing's skin, if you could call it that, was the color of wet bone. It was thin, impossibly thin, and its arms were long enough to touch its shins. Don't look back! We reached the truck, fumbling with the keys as the whistling reached a fever pitch. It was right at the edge of the clearing now. I jumped into the driver's seat, Tyler dived into the passenger side, and I slammed the locks. I floored it, the gravel spraying behind us as we peeled out onto the Forest Service Road. As we sped away, the headlights swept across the brush one last time. For a split second, I saw it. It was standing in the middle of the road we had just been on. It wasn't a man. It wasn't an animal. It was a distortion of both a tall, pale, elongated shape that seemed to blur at the edges. It didn't chase us, it just stood there. And then it whistled, one last time. A long, low, mocking sound that followed us all the way back to the main highway. Tyler didn't say a word for the 3-hour drive back to Asheville. He left the next morning, cutting his trip short. He hasn't been back to North Carolina since. I still live here. I still love these mountains, but I don't go out after dark anymore. I've talked to some of the old-timers since then, men who have lived in these hollows for 80 years. They don't call it a name. They just call it the mimic or the thing in the brush. They told me that whistling is like a dinner bell for things that live in the spaces between the trees. It's an invitation. It tells them that you're there, that you're unaware, and that you're willing to communicate. In the Appalachians, you have to remember that we are the intruders. These mountains have their own laws, their own hunters, and their own secrets. If you're ever hiking and the woods go quiet, if you feel that sudden, inexplicable urge to whistle a tune into the dark, don't do it. I still hear that whistle sometimes, even when I'm safe in my cabin with the doors locked and the curtains drawn. It comes from the woods just beyond the porch light. It's my own whistle, the one I used to use to call my dog. It's waiting, it's patient. It knows that one of these days, I might just be tired enough or distracted enough to whistle back. And that will be the last sound I ever make. The worst thing you could do in the Appalachian Mountains isn't getting lost, running out of water, or even stumbling onto a mother black bear with her cubs. It's answering back when you hear your own name whispered from a place where no human should be. I'm 29 years old, and for the last 6 years, I've worked as a field technician for the Forest Service, stationed out of Blacksburg, Virginia. My job usually involves soil sampling and trail maintenance deep within the Jefferson National Forest. I grew up in these mountains, and I thought I knew their moods. I thought I knew the difference between a bobcat's scream and a woman's cry. But what I encountered 3 months ago on the back slopes of Brush Mountain changed everything I thought I knew about the old hills. If you've never been to Appalachia, you need to understand one thing: these mountains are old. They aren't jagged and young like the Rockies. They're rounded, weathered, and ancient. They've seen things crawl out of the primordial soup that the rest of the world has forgotten. There's a weight to the air here, a kind of heavy, humid silence that feels like it's pressing a secret against your eardrums. We have rules here, rules that every local knows, but nobody talks about at dinner. Don't look into the trees if you feel eyes on you. If you see something that looks like a person but moves like a dog, no, you didn't. And most importantly, if you hear someone calling your name from the brush, keep walking. It was a Tuesday, late October. The canopy was a riot of dying oranges and deep blood reds. I was about 4 miles off the marked trail, heading toward a decommissioned fire watch tower to check the structural integrity of the base. The sun was starting to dip behind the ridges, casting those long, distorted shadows that make every crooked branch look like a reaching hand. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the normal woods silence where the birds just happened to stop for a second. This was a total sensory vacuum. The crickets cut out. The wind, which had been whipping through the oaks all afternoon, just died. The air felt thick, like I was inhaling wet wool. Jackson, the voice was faint. It came from a dense thicket of rhododendrons to my left. My heart didn't just skip a beat, it felt like it hit a wall. It wasn't just a voice, it was her voice. It was my mother's voice. The exact pitch, the exact cadence she uses when she's worried. But my mother was 60 miles away in a nursing home in Roanoke. I froze. Every instinct I had as a woodsman told me to bolt. But there's a specific kind of paralysis that takes over when you hear something that shouldn't exist. Jackson, honey, I'm down here. I tripped. I think I broke my leg. It sounded so real. It had that wet, desperate rattle of someone in actual pain. For a split second, the forest tech part of my brain took over. I almost took a step toward the brush. I almost called out. But then I remembered the rule. I remembered my grandfather telling me, "Jax, the woods don't have a throat, but they can mimic anything that does. If it sounds like someone you love, but they shouldn't be there, it's already too late for whoever that voice belongs to." I didn't answer. I didn't even look toward the thicket. I stared straight ahead at the rusted legs of the watchtower about 200 yards up the ridge. I gripped the straps of my pack until my knuckles turned white and I started walking. Fast. "Jackson, why are you leaving me? It hurts so bad." The voice followed me. It didn't stay back in the rhododendrons. It moved through the brush parallel to me, but I couldn't hear any footsteps, no crunching of dry leaves, no snapping of twigs, just that voice hovering about 10 feet to my left, perfectly synchronized with my pace. My breathing was coming in shallow, jagged stabs. I felt a cold sweat break out across my neck despite the mountain chill. I kept my eyes locked on a specific knot of wood on a pine tree ahead of me. "Don't look, don't look, don't look." Then the voice changed. It wasn't my mother anymore. In the span of a single breath, it shifted into the voice of Sarah, my ex-girlfriend. "We hadn't spoken in 3 years. Jax, please. I'm scared. There's something out here with me. Look at me, please." The desperation in the voice was visceral. It sounded like she was standing right behind my left shoulder. I could almost feel the phantom warmth of someone's breath on my ear. My skin crawled. I felt a primal, lizard brain urge to turn around and defend her, to see what was happening. But I knew if I turned, I wouldn't see Sarah. I'd see whatever was making that sound. And in Appalachia, once you acknowledge them, they don't have to pretend anymore. I broke into a light jog. The voice didn't like that. The tone shifted from hurt and desperate to angry. It was a sudden, jarring transition that made my blood run cold. The voice became a distorted, layered version of my own voice. It sounded like a recording being played at the wrong speed, warped and metallic. "Jackson, look at me." The woods around me seemed to darken instantly, even though the sun hadn't fully set. The shadows stretched out, becoming impossibly long and thin. I could hear something now, not footsteps, but a dragging sound, like something heavy and wet was being pulled over the leaf litter. Slith crunch, slith crunch. I didn't jog anymore. I ran. I sprinted with every bit of strength I had in my legs, ignoring the way the low-hanging branches whipped across my face, drawing blood. I didn't care about the watchtower. I didn't care about my gear. I just needed to get to the clearing where I'd parked my truck. As I ran, the voices began to overlap. It was a cacophony of everyone I'd ever known. My father, my third-grade teacher, my boss, a neighbor from 10 years ago. They were all screaming my name at once, a wall of sound that seemed to vibrate inside my skull. "Jackson, stop! Jackson, here! Jackson, look!" I reached the edge of the ridge where the descent to the parking area began. The truck was a white speck a half-mile down the winding access road. I could see the light reflecting off the windshield. It looked like a lighthouse in a storm. But then the dragging sound got faster. Whatever was in the brush was tired of playing the mimicry game. I heard a sound like a tree trunk snapping, a massive, explosive crack, and then a low, guttural growl that vibrated in my chest. It wasn't a bear. It was too deep, too rhythmic. It sounded like the earth itself was clearing its throat. I didn't look back. I've seen the stories on Reddit, the ones about the not deer or the hide behind. People think they're just creepypastas. They aren't. They're warnings. I hit the gravel of the parking lot so hard I nearly blew out my knees. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so violently I dropped them twice. The silence had returned, that horrible, suffocating hush. I dove into the cab of my Chevy, slammed the door, and locked it. I didn't even catch my breath before I cranked the engine. As the headlights cut through the gathering gloom, they swept across the tree line I had just emerged from. For a split second, maybe less than a heartbeat, the beams caught something. It was tall, impossibly thin. It was pale, the color of a drowned man's stomach, and it was hunched over on joints that bent the wrong way. It didn't have a face, not really. It had a smooth, fleshy surface where a face should be, but it was rippling. As I watched, a mouth-like slit opened in the middle of that pale mass, and even through the glass of my truck and the roar of the engine, I heard it. "Jackson," it whispered. But this time, it didn't sound like my mother or Sarah. It sounded like me. It sounded like my own voice, recorded and played back to me from a grave. I floored it. I didn't stop until I hit the main highway, and I didn't go home that night. I stayed at a well-lit motel in the city, with the TV turned up loud to drown out the silence. I still work for the Forest Service. I have to, but I don't go out alone anymore. And I don't go out after 4,000 p.m. My coworkers think I've just gotten mountain spooked, a common enough thing for guys who spend too much time in the deep brush. They joke about it. They call me Jumpy Jacks. But sometimes, when we're out marking timber and the wind dies down just a little too fast, I see them stop. I see them tilt their heads, listening to something in the distance. If you ever find yourself in the Appalachian backcountry, and the birds stop singing, and the air gets heavy, do yourself a favor. Don't look for the source of the sound. Don't check on the crying child or the injured hiker who knows your name. Just keep your eyes on the trail and keep walking. Because out here, the mountains aren't just scenery. They're hungry, and they've been practicing your voice for a long, long time. Story 3. If you hear your mother calling your name from the dark heart of the woods, and you know for a fact she's been buried 6 feet under for 3 years, do not, under any circumstances, look back. My name is Caleb Vance. I'm 36 years old, and for the better part of a decade, I worked as a specialized search and rescue technician based out of the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. People think they know what lonely feels like until they're standing in the middle of a hollow in the Appalachian Mountains at 3 in the morning, where the trees are so thick they seem to swallow the very light from your headlamp. I've seen things out there that don't make it into the official reports. There's a reason we have the standard operating procedure, and then there's the protocol. The protocol isn't written in any manual. It's passed down from the older rangers to the new guys over lukewarm coffee and trembling hands. It's the only thing that keeps you alive when the mountains decide they want to play with their food. In Appalachia, the silence isn't just an absence of noise. It's a weight. It's a physical presence that presses against your eardrums until you're desperate to hear anything, a bird, a cricket, the wind. But when the silence gets too heavy, that's when the mimics start. They aren't animals, and they aren't ghosts. They're something older, something that lived in these limestone caves long before the first settlers stepped foot on this soil. They are the still folk, and they are the reason the protocol exists. It was October, 3 years ago, when I had my final encounter. A call came in about a missing hiker. A 24-year-old kid named Leo who had wandered off the trail near the Blackwater Canyon. By the time I got there, the sun was already dipping behind the ridges, bleeding a bruised purple across the sky. I was alone, which was my first mistake, but the kid had been missing for 6 hours, and the temperature was dropping fast. I started my sweep, clicking my radio every 15 minutes. "Leo, if you can hear me, blow your whistle or shout. I'm search and rescue." For the first hour, there was nothing but the crunch of dead leaves under my boots. Then the silence hit. It was sudden. The cicadas stopped mid-chirp. The wind died. The woods felt like they were holding their breath. That was when I heard it. "Help. I'm over here. I'm hurt." It sounded exactly like a 24-year-old man in distress. The pitch was right. The panic was there, and the direction seemed to be coming from a dense thicket of laurel about 50 yards to my left. My instinct, the one they train into you, was to run toward the voice. But the protocol stopped me dead in my tracks. Protocol Rule 1, never run toward a voice that doesn't have an echo. I stood perfectly still, tilting my head. "Leo, is that you?" "Help, I'm over here. I'm hurt," the voice repeated. It was the exact same cadence, the exact same inflection. It was a recording. My blood turned to ice. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I reached for my heavy-duty flashlight and began to sweep the area, but I didn't look directly into the laurel. I used my peripheral vision. Protocol Rule 2, never look a mimic in the eyes, or you'll see someone you love, and your feet will move before your brain can stop them. As my light passed over the thicket, I saw it. It wasn't a man. It was tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet, and its limbs were long and spindly, like the branches of a dead oak. It was crouched in a way that no human spine could manage, its skin the color of wet river stone. It didn't have a face, not really. It had a suggestion of features, like a clay mask that had been left out in the rain to melt. "Caleb, come here," I found him, the thing said. My heart nearly stopped. It wasn't Leo's voice anymore. It was my partner, Miller. Miller, who was currently 10 miles away at the base camp. It had stolen his voice from the radio chatter. It was learning. I started to back away, slowly, keeping my light pointed at the ground in front of it. Caleb, where are you going? It's dark out here, the thing said, now using my own mother's voice. My stomach did a slow, sickening roll. That was the moment I realized I was being hunted. The thing stood up. It didn't use its hands to push off the ground, it just unfolded. It moved with a jittery, stop-motion gait that defied physics. Protocol Rule 3. If it starts to mimic you, the hunt has transitioned from lure to kill. Do not speak. Do not pray out loud. Silence is your only armor. I turned and began to hike back toward the ridge, my pace steady but fast. I couldn't run. If you run, you trigger the predatory reflex. You become the deer. Every few seconds, the voice would change. It would be my father, my ex-wife, a crying child. It was cycling through every emotional trigger it could find in the static of the forest's memory. Caleb, stop. You're going the wrong way. The trail is this way. The voice was coming from right behind my left ear now. I could smell it, a cloying, sweet scent of rotting peaches and old copper. I kept my eyes locked on my boots. I could see its shadow stretching out beside mine in the beam of my flashlight. Its shadow had too many joints. I reached the gray zone, a stretch of the forest where the limestone is so dense it messes with electronics. My radio started emitting a high-pitched squeal. The mimic loved that. It began to mimic the static, weaving it into a song that sounded like a distorted lullaby. Suddenly, I tripped. A root, or maybe a hand I didn't stay to check. I went down hard, my flashlight skittering across the leaves, pointing back toward the thing. I saw its feet. They weren't feet, they were elongated, pale talons that looked like they were made of bone. Caleb, look at me, it whispered. This time, it used my own voice. It sounded exactly like me, down to the slight rasp I get when I'm tired. I scrambled for my light, but I didn't look up. I remembered the final rule of the protocol. The one they only tell you when you've been on the job for 5 years, and they know you aren't going to quit. Protocol Rule 4, the mimic cannot enter a circle of iron or cross running water. If trapped, use your blade. I reached for my belt and unsheathed my bushcraft knife high carbon steel. I didn't swing it. I didn't try to fight. I held it in front of me, the cold metal reflecting the dying light of my flashlight. I began to hum, not a song, just a low, vibrating tone to drown out the voices. The thing screamed. It wasn't a human scream. It was the sound of 1,000 dry branches snapping at once, mixed with the howl of a dying coyote. The pressure in my ears intensified until I thought my eardrums would burst. And then, as quickly as it had started, the forest went dead silent again. I didn't wait. I scrambled up and sprinted. I didn't care about the predatory reflex anymore. I ran until my lungs burned like they were filled with hot coals. I didn't stop until I hit the creek bed 3 miles down the ridge. When I got there, Miller was waiting by the truck, looking pale. Caleb, where the hell have you been? We've been trying to reach you all night, he shouted. I didn't answer right away. I looked at him, really looked at him. I looked at his eyes, the way he moved, the way his shadow fell on the gravel. Did you find Leo? I asked, my voice cracking. Miller shook his head. No, but we found his gear, about 5 miles from where you were. It was weird, man. His boots were still laced up, but there was no one in them, just empty boots. I quit the service that day. I packed my bags and moved to the city, where the lights never go out, and the only thing you hear at night is the sound of traffic and sirens. People ask me why I left the mountains, why I gave up a career I loved. I tell them I just got tired of the cold. But sometimes, when it's late and the apartment is quiet, I'll hear a voice from the hallway. It'll sound like Miller, or my mother, or that kid Leo. And then the voice will change. It'll sound like me whispering from behind the door. Caleb, look at me. I never do, because out here there is no protocol. Out here you're on your own. If you're ever hiking in the Appalachians and you feel like the woods are watching you, if the birds stop singing and the air turns sweet like rot, don't look for the source. Turn around, keep your eyes on the ground, and for the love of God, don't say a word. Because the mountains don't just have ears, they have voices. And they're very, very good at using yours.